My name is Vanessa Cole, and at 42, I've lived a life most people only read about in scandalous novels. It all started with a label, gold digger. The moment I walked down the aisle to marry Edward Langford, heir to the Langford fortune, that's all they saw. Not the love in our eyes, not the connection we shared, just dollar signs reflected in my gaze, according to them. The Langfords were old money, the kind that buys islands and breeds prize-winning horses. They resided in a mansion that made museums look cozy. Their lives were a whirlwind of galas, polo matches, and quiet disdain for anyone they deemed beneath them. And in their eyes, a woman from my background, a woman who'd worked tirelessly to build a modest career, was definitely beneath them. Edward was different. He saw past the surface, past the expectations. He loved my spirit, my independence, my refusal to be anything other than myself. He was kind, generous, and surprisingly down-to-earth for a man who'd never wanted for anything. Our love was real, a beacon in the storm of their disapproval. But that didn't matter to them. To the Langfords, I was nothing more than a threat to their legacy, a viper slithering into their perfectly manicured garden. The whispers started immediately, sharp and poisonous, designed to cut me down. I heard them in the hallways of their grand estate, at family dinners, even from the staff, who seemed to take their cues from the family matriarch, Edward's formidable mother, Eleanor. Little did they know, their cruelty was only making me stronger, sharpening my resolve, and planting the seeds of what was to come. The Langford family was a force to be reckoned with. They were the kind of wealthy that permeated every aspect of their lives, from the tailored suits to the perfectly coiffed hair, to the subtle, yet undeniable, air of superiority. They weren't just rich, they were old rich, the kind that came with a family crest and a history stretching back centuries. Their money wasn't just about luxury, it was about power, influence, and control. Eleanor Langford, Edward's mother, was the undisputed matriarch. A woman with a spine of steel and a gaze that could freeze fire, she ruled the family with an iron fist. She had handpicked Edward's previous girlfriends, all socialites from equally prominent families, women who understood the unspoken rules of their world. I, with my messy bun and independent spirit, was an anomaly, a glitch in her carefully constructed plan. Then there was Richard, Edward's older brother. He was everything Edward wasn't, ambitious, ruthless, and completely devoted to the family business. He saw me as a threat to his inheritance, a gold-digging interloper who had somehow managed to bewitch his brother. His eyes held a constant, simmering resentment, a promise of future conflict. He was always polite, always correct, but the venom dripped from his words like slow poison. Even the younger Langfords, the cousins and nieces and nephews, seemed to carry the weight of their family's expectations. They were polite, but distant, their smiles never quite reaching their eyes. I was an outsider, a curiosity, someone to be observed and judged, but never truly accepted. Their world was a gilded cage, and I was a bird with clipped wings, forever trying to find my place within it. The Langford family's wealth was a fortress, and I was standing outside, facing its formidable walls. But amidst the coldness and the calculated stares, there was Edward. He was my haven, my safe place. He saw the real me, the woman behind the gold digger label. He loved my laughter, my passion, my fierce independence. He cherished the way I challenged him, the way I made him see the world differently. Our love story wasn't a fairy tale. It was messy, complicated, and forged in the fires of adversity. We met at a charity event, ironically enough. I was volunteering, he was reluctantly attending. He was instantly captivated by my refusal to be impressed by his wealth or status. I, in turn, was drawn to his genuine kindness, his quick wit, and the sadness that seemed to linger in his eyes. We spent hours talking that night, discovering a shared love of old movies, a similar sense of humor, and a mutual desire to make a difference in the world. He wasn't like his family. He hated the stuffy galas, the superficial conversations, the constant pressure to conform. He longed for something real, something authentic. And he found it in me. Our courtship was a whirlwind of secret dates, stolen kisses, and whispered promises. We knew his family would never approve, so we kept our relationship hidden for as long as we could. But eventually, the truth had to come out. When we announced our engagement, the Langford mansion practically shook with disapproval. But Edward stood firm. He chose me, and that was all that mattered. Or so I thought. The battle had only just begun. Our love was a powerful force, but the Langford family was a formidable opponent, and they were determined to break us apart. The wedding was a spectacle, a carefully orchestrated display of Langford wealth and power. The guest list read like a who's who of society, the flowers cost more than my apartment, and the security detail was tighter than Fort Knox. But amidst the extravagance, Edward and I held on to each other, our love a small, defiant flame in the face of their disapproval. During the reception, Eleanor made a point of introducing me to every eligible bachelor in her social circle, each introduction laced with thinly veiled insults about my background and intentions. Richard spent the evening lurking in the shadows, his eyes following my every move, a constant reminder of the resentment that simmered beneath his polished facade. The years that followed were a constant barrage of subtle digs and not-so-subtle attempts to undermine my position in the family. I was excluded from important meetings, my opinions were dismissed, and my attempts to connect with the family were met with polite, but firm, resistance. Eleanor made sure to remind me, constantly, that I would never truly be a Langford. That I was an outsider, a pretender, a gold digger who had somehow managed to trick her son. She would subtly question my spending habits, scrutinize my wardrobe, and criticize my friends. She made it clear that she believed I was only after Edward's money and that she would do everything in her power to protect her family's legacy. Richard, on the other hand, took a more insidious approach. He would subtly sow seeds of doubt in Edward's mind, questioning my loyalty, my motives, and my past. He would highlight my differences from the Langford family, subtly reminding Edward that I didn't belong in their world. The emotional toll was immense. There were days when I wanted to pack my bags and run, to escape the constant judgment and cruelty. But I loved Edward, and I refused to let them break us apart. I would endure their insults, their whispers, and their constant attempts to undermine me. I would watch, I would wait, and I would bide my time. The cruelty wasn't always overt. It was often subtle, a carefully crafted dance of exclusion and judgment designed to make me feel like I didn't belong. Picture this, a family dinner, the long mahogany table gleaming under the candlelight, the air thick with unspoken tension. Eleanor would regale the family with stories of Edward's childhood, tales that always conveniently omitted my presence. She'd talk about his accomplishments, his intelligence, his suitability for someone more his equal. Richard would chime in with anecdotes about the Langford family history, emphasizing their lineage, their contributions to society, their unwavering commitment to tradition. He'd look at me pointedly as he spoke, a silent reminder that I was an outsider, a newcomer who could never truly understand their world. The younger Langfords, the cousins and nieces, would offer polite smiles, but their eyes held a detached curiosity, as if I were an exotic creature in a zoo. They'd ask about my career, always with a hint of condescension, as if my modest achievements were nothing compared to their privileged lives. I was often seated at the far end of the table, isolated and alone, while the rest of the family engaged in conversations I couldn't follow, jokes I didn't understand, and references that were completely foreign to me. It was a constant reminder that I was different, that I didn't belong. The whispers were another form of torture. I'd walk into a room and the conversations would suddenly stop, replaced by awkward silence and averted gazes. I'd catch snippets of conversations, hushed tones, and knowing glances, always about me. Did you see what she's wearing? Do you think she even knows about wine? She's just after the money, you know. Even the staff participated in the cruelty. They'd treat me with a polite, but distant, deference, always addressing me as Mrs. Langford, never using my first name, a subtle reminder that I was still an outsider. They'd follow Eleanor's instructions to the letter, catering to her every whim while subtly neglecting my needs. It was a constant battle to maintain my dignity, to refuse to let their cruelty break me down. But each insult, each exclusion, each whispered comment chipped away at my spirit, fueling my anger and strengthening my resolve. I would not be broken. I would turn their cruelty into my strength. The turning point came on my birthday. It wasn't a grand affair, just a small dinner party Edward had planned. He knew how much I hated the large, formal events the Langfords favored. He'd invited a few of my close friends, people who knew the real me, not the gold digger caricature the Langfords had created. Everything seemed to be going well. Edward had even managed to convince Eleanor to be civil, a small victory in itself. But then, as I was opening a gift from one of my friends, Eleanor made her move. "Such thoughtful gifts," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "So different from the Langford tradition of giving something lasting." She then presented me with a prenuptial agreement, a revised version that stripped me of nearly all my rights in the event of Edward's death. "Edward felt it was necessary," she said, her eyes glinting with triumph. "To protect the family's interests, of course." I looked at Edward, my heart sinking. He looked ashen, his eyes filled with guilt and shame. He hadn't known about this. Eleanor had gone behind his back, manipulating him with her usual skill. In that moment, something inside me snapped. The years of enduring their cruelty, the constant feeling of being an outsider, the knowledge that they would never accept me, it all came crashing down. But instead of breaking, I felt a surge of anger, a burning desire to fight back. I calmly took the agreement from Eleanor's hand, tore it in half, and dropped it onto the table. "I don't need Edward's money," I said, my voice trembling with rage. "I love him. But I will not be treated like this. I am done being your punching bag." I walked out of the room, leaving the Langfords speechless. Edward followed me, begging for forgiveness, but I couldn't face him. The trust had been broken. That night, I made a decision. I would no longer be a victim. I would learn their secrets, exploit their weaknesses, and take back everything they had tried to steal from me, my dignity, my happiness, and my future. The game had changed. It was no longer about love or acceptance. It was about survival. And I was ready to play. The first step was knowledge. I had to understand their world, their finances, their weaknesses. It was like learning a new language, a language of stocks and bonds, of offshore accounts and family trusts. I started small, asking innocent questions during dinner conversations, feigning interest in the family business. "Richard, that merger you mentioned, how will that affect the company's portfolio?" "Eleanor, I was reading about estate planning, and it seems so complicated. How do you manage it all?" At first, they were dismissive, condescending even. They assumed I was too naive, too ignorant to understand the complexities of their world. But I persisted, asking more questions, doing my research, and slowly piecing together the puzzle. I spent hours in the Langford library, poring over old documents, annual reports, and financial statements. I learned about their investments, their debts, their philanthropic endeavors, and their hidden liabilities. I discovered that the Langford fortune wasn't as solid as it appeared. There were cracks in the foundation, vulnerabilities that could be exploited. I also started observing their personal lives more closely. I noticed Richard's gambling addiction, a secret he desperately tried to hide. I learned about Eleanor's obsession with maintaining the family's reputation, a weakness that could be used against her. I discovered that the younger Langfords were burdened by their parents' expectations, resentful of their privileged lives, and desperate to break free. I became a student of human nature, studying their habits, their motivations, and their fears. I learned to read between the lines, to decipher their hidden agendas, and to anticipate their next moves. It was a slow, painstaking process, but with each new piece of information, my plan began to take shape. I was no longer just a victim. I was a strategist, a manipulator, a player in their game. And I was determined to win. The seeds of their downfall were being sown, one carefully placed question, one subtle observation, one stolen document at a time. They had underestimated me for too long. Now, they would pay the price. Information was power, but alliances were essential. I couldn't take on the Langfords alone. I needed someone on the inside, someone who understood their world but was also disillusioned with it. That person turned out to be Emily, Richard's youngest daughter. Emily was a bright, rebellious young woman who had always chafed under the Langford family's rigid expectations. She was an artist, a free spirit trapped in a gilded cage. She hated the galas, the polo matches, the superficial conversations. She longed for something more meaningful, something more real. I noticed her quiet discontent, her subtle acts of rebellion, her yearning for something different. I started reaching out to her, offering her a listening ear, a shoulder to cry on, a safe space where she could be herself without judgment. We bonded over our shared love of art, our disdain for the Langford family's values, and our mutual desire to make a difference in the world. I learned about her dreams, her fears, and her resentments. She, in turn, began to trust me, to confide in me, to see me as an ally, not an enemy. Slowly, subtly, I began to enlist her help. I asked her about family secrets, about financial irregularities, about Richard's gambling debts. She was hesitant at first, torn between her loyalty to her family and her desire for justice. But as she saw the evidence I had gathered, as she understood the extent of the Langford family's corruption, she began to see the necessity of my plan. Emily became my eyes and ears on the inside, feeding me information, providing me with access to documents, and helping me navigate the treacherous waters of the Langford family. She was my most valuable asset, my secret weapon. Together, we were a force to be reckoned with. The Langfords had underestimated us both. They saw us as weak, as insignificant, as easy to manipulate. But they were wrong. We were stronger than they could ever imagine. And we were ready to bring them down. The alliance was forged, the plan was set, and the countdown had begun. Our carefully laid plans were unexpectedly accelerated by tragedy. Edward, always a gentle soul, had been battling a hidden illness for years, a condition he kept secret from his family, fearing their judgment and control. It was only after our marriage that he confided in me, sharing his fears and anxieties. We faced it together, seeking the best medical care and cherishing every moment we had. But the illness progressed relentlessly. One morning, Edward collapsed. He was rushed to the hospital, but it was too late. He passed away peacefully, with me by his side, holding his hand. The Langford family was devastated, but their grief was tinged with suspicion. They couldn't shake the feeling that I was somehow responsible, that I had hastened his death to get my hands on his money. Edward's death changed everything. It shattered my heart, leaving me with a grief so profound it felt like a physical wound. But it also shifted the power dynamics within the Langford family. I was no longer just Edward's wife, an outsider trying to fit in. I was now his widow, the sole beneficiary of his estate, the woman who controlled his share of the Langford fortune. The Langfords closed ranks, determined to wrest control of Edward's assets from me. They challenged the will, spread rumors about my character, and tried to intimidate me into relinquishing my claim. But I stood firm. I had Edward's love, his trust, and his legacy to protect. And I had a plan. His death, while a devastating blow, became the catalyst for my ultimate triumph. It gave me the leverage I needed to expose their secrets, to exploit their weaknesses, and to take back everything they had ever stolen from me. The game was about to begin in earnest. The Langfords thought they could control me, manipulate me, and force me out of their lives. But they were wrong. I was stronger than they ever imagined. And I was ready to make them pay. The whispers of Gold Digger would soon turn to screams of regret. The battle for control of Edward's assets was fierce and relentless. The Langfords, with their army of lawyers and their vast resources, threw everything they had at me. But I was prepared. I had Emily on my side, feeding me information, anticipating their moves, and helping me counter their attacks. I also had my own team of legal experts, people who believed in me and were willing to fight for justice. I used my knowledge of the Langford family's finances to my advantage. I exposed Richard's gambling debts, forcing him to relinquish his control of the family business. I revealed Eleanor's secret offshore accounts, jeopardizing her reputation and undermining her authority. I threatened to expose their unethical business practices, forcing them to the negotiating table. One by one, I dismantled their carefully constructed empire, using their own secrets against them. I negotiated shrewdly, strategically, and ruthlessly, always with the goal of gaining control of their assets. I didn't want their money for myself. I wanted to use it for good, to help people who had been exploited and abused by the Langford family. I invested in sustainable businesses, funded educational programs, and supported charities that were dedicated to fighting inequality. I used the Langford fortune to create a better world, to right the wrongs they had committed. The Langfords were furious. They couldn't believe that I, the woman they had dismissed as a gold digger, was now in control of their destiny. They tried everything to stop me, but it was too late. I had won. I had taken their power, their influence, and their money. And I was using it to make the world a better place. The whispers of gold digger had finally been silenced, replaced by grudging respect and bitter resentment. They had underestimated me for too long. Now, they were paying the ultimate price. The tables had turned completely. The realization dawned on the Langfords slowly, a creeping horror that spread through their ranks like a disease. At first, they dismissed my actions as mere coincidence, attributing their misfortunes to bad luck or poor judgment. But as the pieces began to fall into place, as their secrets were exposed and their power eroded, they started to understand the truth. They realized that I had been playing them all along, that I had used their own cruelty and arrogance against them. They saw that I had carefully studied their weaknesses, exploited their vulnerabilities, and turned their own weapons against them. Eleanor was the first to fully grasp the extent of my plan. Her eyes, once filled with disdain, now reflected a chilling mixture of fear and rage. She saw that I had outsmarted her, outmaneuvered her, and stripped her of her power. The matriarch, the woman who had ruled the Langford family with an iron fist, was now powerless to stop me. Richard, consumed by his gambling debts and his shattered reputation, was a broken man. He had lost everything: his control of the family business, his social standing, and his self-respect. He realized too late that his resentment and his ambition had blinded him to the true threat. The younger Langfords, burdened by their parents' expectations and resentful of their privileged lives, watched in stunned silence as their world crumbled around them. They saw that I had not only taken their money but also exposed the hypocrisy and corruption that had been festering beneath the surface of their gilded lives. They tried to fight back, to regain control, but it was too late. The tide had turned. I had the knowledge, the alliances, and the resources to dismantle their empire completely. They were powerless to stop me. The tables had finally turned. The woman they had dismissed as a gold digger was now their master, the architect of their downfall. The whispers of gold digger had been replaced by screams of regret. They had underestimated me for too long. Now, they were paying the price for their arrogance and their cruelty. Their reign of terror was over. The era of Vanessa Cole had begun. With the Langford fortune now under my control, I embarked on a mission to use it for good, to prove once and for all that I was never just after money. I established the Edward Langford Foundation, dedicated to supporting causes that Edward had been passionate about during his life. We funded research into the illness that had taken his life, providing grants to scientists and doctors who were working to find a cure. We established scholarships for underprivileged students, giving them the opportunity to pursue their dreams and break free from the cycle of poverty. We supported local artists and musicians, providing them with a platform to showcase their talent and express their creativity. I invested in sustainable businesses that were committed to protecting the environment and creating jobs in underserved communities. I supported charities that were dedicated to fighting inequality, promoting social justice, and empowering women and girls. I used the Langford fortune to create a better world, to right the wrongs they had committed, and to honor Edward's memory. I traveled the world, meeting with the people whose lives had been touched by the Edward Langford Foundation, listening to their stories, and witnessing the impact of our work. I saw the smiles on the faces of the students who were receiving scholarships, the hope in the eyes of the patients who were benefiting from the medical research, and the pride in the voices of the artists who were showcasing their work. It was then that I realized that I had finally found my purpose, my calling. I was no longer just Vanessa Cole, the gold digger. I was Vanessa Cole, the philanthropist, the advocate, the champion of the underdog. The Langfords watched in stunned silence as I transformed their ill-gotten gains into a force for good. They couldn't deny the impact of my work, the positive change that I was bringing to the world. They had accused me of being greedy and selfish, but I had proven them wrong. I had used their money to create a legacy of compassion, generosity, and justice. My triumph was complete. Years have passed since I took control of the Langford fortune, years filled with hard work, dedication, and a profound sense of purpose. The Edward Langford Foundation continues to thrive, impacting countless lives around the world. I often think about Edward, about the love we shared, and about the sacrifices we made. I know he would be proud of what I have accomplished, of the legacy I have created in his name. The Langford family is a distant memory, a chapter in my life that is now closed. Eleanor, stripped of her power and her influence, lives a quiet, secluded life, haunted by the ghosts of her past. Richard, consumed by his regrets, has faded into obscurity. The younger Langfords, freed from their parents' expectations, have found their own paths, pursuing their passions and making their own contributions to the world. Emily and I remain close friends, bound by our shared experiences and our mutual respect. She has become a successful artist, using her talent to raise awareness about social issues and to inspire positive change. We often laugh about the days when we were plotting our revenge against the Langfords, marveling at how far we have come. Looking back on my journey, I realize that I have come full circle. I arrived in the Langford world as an outsider, a gold digger, a threat to their legacy. I endured their cruelty, their judgment, and their constant attempts to undermine me. But I refused to be broken. I turned their negativity into my strength, using their own weapons against them. I took their money, not for myself, but to use it for good, to create a better world, to honor Edward's memory. I silenced their whispers of gold digger with my actions, proving that I was never just after money. I was after justice, after equality, after a world where everyone has the opportunity to pursue their dreams and reach their full potential. I have found peace, knowing that I have overcome the judgment and the cruelty, that I have emerged from the ashes stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. My name is Vanessa Cole, and I am proud of who I have become. I am a survivor, a philanthropist, an advocate, a champion of the underdog. And I am living proof that even the most unlikely of people can change the world. The end.